Hey guys, HaemessB here with another Reddit challenge. This time it's the Where'd I Leave My Wallet challenge. In this challenge you have to take off from Kerbin, go to some external planet or moon, which I chose HaemessB for my mission. Then you have to take off from that moon, land back on Kerbin, take off from Kerbin, go back to whatever body you landed on before, land again, and go back to Kerbin and land safely. So it was really tough. It took me a long time, probably about 2 weeks, since I have a full-time job, of just testing things and making little changes. And this is the final vehicle, of course. It's got a large nuclear transfer stage, which also has extra fuel to keep the lander refueled. It's got a jetpack stage for landing on Kerbin and returning to orbit, and it's got the lander on top, which I used to land on HaemessB. So anyone who's wondering at this point why Jeb is in the cockpit and not Bob, it's because I was trying to do a little story where Jeb is on a mission to go to HaemessB to find Bob's wallet that he had left there on a previous mission. Jeb manages to find it, but instead of picking it up and bringing it back, he just leaves the flag because he thought all he had to do was find it. And then he comes back to Kerbin and Bob is really angry and has to go and retrieve it. But the voice acting was taking a long time to put together, and I just decided that I wanted to get this video out because I was pretty proud of it, and I decided to just do commentary over it instead. It was a little disappointing to drop that part of it, but I figured this kind of video is more my style anyway. There are a lot of people who are really good at doing cinematics in Kerbal Space Program, and I should probably just leave it to them to continue doing what they do. So here we are coming up on our first landing on HaemessB, and this one, I didn't realize I was landing on a hill until it was pretty late, so I was really worried that I was going to tip over, so I just decided to pick a new spot. And luckily I think we had plenty of fuel, so it wasn't really that big of a deal. And Jeb is really freaking excited to finally land and cut the engine. So now we're hopping out exploring HaemessB for the first time. Jeb is extremely excited, realizes he can jump really high on HaemessB, and he's found Bob's wallet, so he needs to plant a flag. So one thing I did do in this video was a lot of editing. The entire mission, like I said, probably took me about 2 weeks. Just the part where I landed back on Kerbin probably took me 2 days, and I rage quit many times during that part because it was so freaking difficult. The lander was just so heavy, the parachutes kept ripping it apart every time they would open, so I had to kind of do it right, land near the Space Center so that I could have, kind of some idea of what the altitude the parachutes were going to open at was. And so now Jeb has done a little bit of running around, and it's time to head back for the first time. So we obviously can't just do a HaemessB escape on this one. We have to redock with our orbiting transfer stage. And I got really lucky here. This was actually my first try, and I managed to get a really good encounter, so it was pretty easy. I was really excited about that because this was something I thought would probably be one of the parts of the mission that took a long time. But I managed to pull it right in. I think I got a 400-meter encounter right off the bat. Was able to pull it right in and dock. And of course, as I said earlier, I did use refueling in this mission, which I know a lot of people kind of considered that as a goal for their own missions where they wouldn't refuel any of their craft during the mission. But I just didn't really see a way of doing that since I'm still, not an expert Kerbal Space Program player by any means. I thought it would just be, kind of my way to get it done. So that was the way I ended up doing it. And there we have our first HaemessB escape, and Now it's time to bring our periaps down into the Kerbal atmosphere and start our aerobraking, which, like I said, probably took me about an hour, and I'm not going to make you guys watch any of that because it took forever. One thing I did do, though, was just for the cinematic portion, I had this little rotation right here of Jeb looking out of the window at Kerbal as it rotates, or as the craft rotates over the surface. And I thought this was kind of cool, so I just left it in. And this was during the aerobraking, like I said. So here we are doing the undock and the deorbit burn. And this was when I quick saved, and like I said, this was probably the 20th try of me doing this. It took me so long. This thing is really, really heavy, and it just did not want to stay together when the parachutes opened. So yeah, I had to burn a little bit here because I thought I was going to overshoot. I ended up coming in short, unfortunately. And yeah, you can just see the strain it's under when these chutes open. Luckily I had the jets going just right that time. I slowed down to just the speed I needed to hit, and they opened and everything was fine. So then I also had to waste some lander fuel here just to touch down safely, because this thing was coming down too fast. It would break the jet engines if it landed at that speed. So there we go, our first landing on Kerbal. And then I have Bob here in a little rover with a gantry and a ladder on it so that he can drive out, retrieve Jeb, and as he thought, his wallet, but unfortunately Jeb had other ideas. And this rover was one of those little projects I worked on while I was, doing other things, just because I thought it would be kind of cool to transfer the crew during the mission without actually touching the craft. Like, I didn't refuel it or anything. I just got Jeb out and put Bob in. And something kind of funny happened when Jeb got out of the cockpit. As he was climbing down the ladder, somehow I had to let go of the ladder and just fall down to the rover. And when he stood up, somehow he fell through the floor, which you'll see here. Which I don't understand. Maybe someone can tell me what happened. But the look on his face was priceless. So here's where we have Bob asking Jeb for his wallet, and Jeb being confused and not being able to hand it over. So Bob unfortunately has to now board the craft and redo the entire mission. And at this point, my confidence started picking up a little bit. I'd already landed, so the hardest part was over, and I knew that I would probably be able to do it from now on. So just decoupling the deorbit burn stage and getting the jets going. And as you can see, I've transferred a little bit of the fuel from the jet engines into the lander because the jet engines won't actually function until they run out of fuel, so I just took a little bit of that because it doesn't need it all. Basically, the only reason why I even had to put so much fuel in the jet engine was just so that I could attach it, because the very small tanks were too small and the air intake was rubbing up against the girders. So yeah, here we have a good detachment. I actually had to do this a couple times to get it not to spin, because it would tend to spin when I detached that node there. So here we have the final jettisoning of the empty fuel tanks, and this craft now has to, of course, dock with the transfer stage for the last time, and then do the final HaemessB burn. And here, because of my fuel transfers, one of the tanks ran out before the other one, so it put it into a spin here. And here you can see me just transferring the last of the fuel out of that tank and topping off the lander, and then decoupling, and that's the last we'll see of that. or so I thought. I narrowly avoided disaster here when I started burning my engines because I almost crashed back into the transfer stage. Oh yeah, that was really close. So yeah, here we are, back on our way to HaemessB. We've ditched all the dead weight, and from now on it's just this one craft doing the rest of the mission. And this second part of the mission was a lot faster than the first part. Since the craft was so much smaller, it was a lot easier to circularize the orbit and slow down, land right at the flag. It was no problem. Well, I did land about almost 2 kilometers away, I think, but I thought it was close enough because it only took me like 30 seconds or so to fly over there with the RCS packs. So here we have Bob landing. Second HaemessB landing for this craft in one mission. And unfortunately, because of where the flag was on HaemessB, it was pretty far south of the equator, so the orbit that I got around HaemessB only intersected the flag on the night side, so there was really no way for me to land in the daytime without doing a severe plane change, and I just didn't have enough fuel to do that, so I had to just land in the dark. But once we got to the flag, I took some time to fast forward until the sun came up, so at least Bob would have a little bit of light on his way back. And it was really pretty for me on HaemessB at this time, just because I had done it, and I knew from this point on all I had to do was get back to Kerbal, open the parachutes, everything would be fine, mission would be over, and I was really happy about that. And you can't really beat a sunrise on HaemessB, in my opinion. I love the color of HaemessB, how it's kind of blue in the day, and then when the darkness takes over it turns kind of green. And Bob likes it too. So now we just have to get back on the craft and take off for our return trip. And this launch coming up was one of my favorite launches I've ever done, not just because this mission was so hard and I knew it was almost over, but because we got a nice sunrise, moonrise, and then eventually a Kerbal rise, and everything was just lined up and it just looked so great. It's just what makes me love Kerbal Space Program. Ah, so pretty. This is the kind of stuff that makes you want to do cinematics. And now here for the final time, we are bringing our periaps down into the atmosphere of Kerbal. And I thought about getting that moon encounter there, but then I thought, nah, I just want to be done with this. I don't want anything to happen like getting thrown out into interplanetary space or anything. So we just bring our periaps down, come back to Kerbal, come through the atmosphere at a really, really high speed, and eventually when we slow down, I realized that my parachutes were not going to work for some reason, and maybe that's because I had to repack them when I landed the first time, but they just would not open, so I had to manually open each one of them. And I was kind of worried about how close the ground was getting. I couldn't really see it that well, so I was hoping I was able to get them open and slow down before they actually popped open and tore the craft apart like I was worried about earlier. So that was the last of our fuel, and now I'm just burning monopropellant to make sure I was slow enough for the parachutes, and eventually landing. And now here we have Bob on the surface of Kerbal once again with his wallet, and the mission is finally complete. So thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I'll see